Right, so hello, welcome back to the Philosophy Club here in the middle of France, La Creuse, the secret department at the heart of Old Gaul. And it's been quite a week. I'll just share a few things that I've been up to this week and going on in the world. Obviously, tragically, the war in Ukraine continues. Biden gave an extremely good, I think, State of the Union address, heckled by by a whole ragtag army of Republican, intellectually challenged people, I would say. But Biden is pursuing the path that America needs to follow, in my opinion, and also in the UK there's been some interesting political developments as the Conservative Party continues to dig its own hole. So things, and in Gaza, the tragedy of that war continues. We meet in the face of that catastrophic and unnecessary violence. I've said many times that Israel needn't have replied as she did. I think this is all in the psyche of Netanyahu and his cronies who have sort of weaponized relations with Palestine instead of making them friends and creating a two-state solution which would be in everybody's advantage. Instead, they've created a nightmare scenario, and I think Biden is about to say enough is enough and build a like a pier to get aid into Gaza as soon as possible. Children are dying of hunger there, which is completely outrageous. It's coming up to Ramadan. There should be a truce during the entirety of Ramadan, an unconditional truce. Both sides should just put weapons down and and get on with life. So anyway, in that context, I just want to report, I went to Paris this week to return my daughter Sophia to the airport to return to England. She was here at the Philosophy Club for the last 3 months, and it was great fun with Sophia. We miss her, but we visited the Musée de Cluny in Paris, which is a great centre for medieval art in French history. It was the townhouse of the abbot of the great monastery of Cluny, which was in Bourgogne, not far from here. I've been there to the ruins. It's a magnificent site. I have a special fondness because it was a haven of scholarship, and the abbots of Cluny were devoted to comparative philosophical study of the Bible. They gave shelter to Peter Abelard, the philosopher from Paris, when he was being hounded as a heretic. They said, no, he's not a heretic, come and stay here, Peter, and he took refuge there. They were also translating the Quran into Latin under their abbot, because they realised that the medieval world would be much more sensibly served if the intellectuals were to actually look at things like the Quran, like Islam, like Judaism, and not, declare war on everything they didn't understand. First, let's understand it, do our job as intellectuals. And so Cluny was a great centre, and this place in Paris was its French townhouse in Paris, and it's still standing. And it now houses the Museum of Medieval Art in France, which is beautiful. Worth seeing if you do go. The last room is the tapestry of the Lady with the Unicorn, which is a famous late medieval French art piece, and it's absolutely stunning, worth seeing. Very famous images. So to see them in person is brilliant. I strongly recommend people to go. And it was just nice to be, walking down the Seine where all the people have their bookstalls, and Paris is still being Paris, so well done. Ha. I also helped chair the meeting for the World Peace Gardens Network, which is a network of gardens throughout the world dedicated to peace. With a little plaque up saying, we're a World Peace Garden. We want to get more gardens to join, so if you have a garden, it doesn't have to be big and ostentatious. Of course, if it's Versailles or the Vatican Gardens, feel free to join. But if you just have a little garden or allotment, that's fine too. I believe gardens are the secret weapon of the peace movement. We will reclaim the earth, as Christ said. The meek shall inherit the earth. The gentle. The German translation of the Bible is interesting. The word for meek in German, I was looking it up because I was sharing that quote with a German friend who didn't know the word meek. So, we struggled to, what does this word mean? Well, I found the German eventually, and it means gentle as well, kind-hearted. I'll find it later. I can't find the actual word here, but it was it's interesting. What is the meek? Who are the meek? How will we inherit the earth? If we're being bombed from the air, if we're being taken out by robot, drones, running on a program called the Gospel, as the Israeli army's been doing, mass slaughter, how can the meek inherit the earth? Well, it may seem difficult at times, and it's as if those words have evaporated into thin air, but no, I still have faith in them. The souls of those who've died in that terrible slaughter, are immortal in my opinion, and will live on. And the people that have done those deeds, have made a terrible and utter mistake. So, I've also been involved with the Delphic Games this week. We've been having meetings. The Delphic Games is the equivalent to the Olympic Games, but for culture and the arts. So we've just put in a bid to the European Union to get funded so that we can... I want to let every school in Europe, and I mean Greater Europe, all 51 nations that count as the family of European nations, every school should learn about the Delphic Games and have it included in their curricula. And every university in Europe should know about the Delphic Games. Sadly, it's a sort of secret. Most people don't know about it. They know about the Olympic Games, that's a big thing. But the Delphic Games are at least as important in the ancient world. They ran for 1,000 years. But they brought together poets, artists, musicians, dancers, theatre performers and playwrights who went to Delphi and under the aegis of Apollo and the Muses, they performed works of beauty. We've revived those games in 1994. The office is in Berlin, and there have been many performances since then, and I'm their education coordinator. So, if you are a teacher or an academic, please get in touch and I'll send you the information. And please put it in the curriculum. We've also had International Women's Day a couple of days ago, which is very important. I've always been a supporter of the importance of women's equality. My mother was a strong feminist and a socialist and a peace campaigner. And she, taught her children to realise this. And she was also a Francophile, used to come to France a lot. She followed the French peace movement and French intellectuals like Simone de Beauvoir. Anais Nin was one of her favourite authors. So my mother brought me up on realising the importance of the feminine soul. If we talk about Abelard, we have to remember Eloise and this incredible dialectic between male and female that's been going on for millennia. And it needs calibrating so that it comes out with a happy ending. And too many women are still oppressed and subject to violence, to wife beating and worse. In India there are sort of wife burnings. If your dowry isn't enough, it's shocking. And also there's female infanticide going on, where if you have a girl child you conceived, you will get an abortion because you don't want girl children. Well, this is all outrageous and wrong. Obviously, the genders are equally beautiful in the eyes of God, and in fact, it was one of the things Muhammad stopped. He wouldn't allow, because in Mecca in his day, some of the so-called pagan Arabs were not doing female infanticide. They didn't know. They couldn't tell what the gender was in the womb. They weren't doing abortions, but they were killing the girl children because they found them, a burden. They preferred the male child, and Muhammad put a stop to that. It's one of the reforms that Islam brought in, and so we should honour the work of women worldwide, and many great women philosophers and thinkers as well. I hope my daughter will grow into one. I'm sure she will. I've also been busy this week on a campaign to monitor the Indian elections that are coming up. There's an international panel for monitoring the Indian elections because Modi has been in charge. I think that's enough now. Well done, Modi. Time to go and do something else. Do some gardening and let the other people take over, because I think it's not right in a democracy that people get so, ensconced that other parties never get a chance, get no access to the funding and the patronage that comes with that. So Modi's been misusing that a little bit, to put it mildly. The people of Kashmir, for instance, are not being given a vote. Millions of people in Kashmir are not going to vote in these elections. So anyway, there's a panel of international and Indian academics, philosophers, political scientists and experts in electioneering come together. I've been invited to join it, and we've had a couple of meetings, one this week. We're going to be launching a report on March the 15th. The most worrying thing I've discovered is that the Indian elections are going to be through electronic voting machines, what are called EVMs. But all the experts have analysed them and said they can be hacked. You can pre-program them to come out with the results you want. And you can do that remotely even. So these machines are going to give the appearance of democracy without the reality. And so this panel is raising this red flag over the situation and asking that at the last minute we should have some kind of track and trace system so that the votes given through the EVMs are registered and stored and we know they're genuine. Otherwise anybody can just make this up. And that's the fear. So this panel are very interesting Indian intellectuals. I'm there just because of my work as a global thinker and because I'm a great lover of Indian culture and I've travelled there many times. And I want to see, India is the largest democracy on the planet. We can't allow it to stop being a democracy and to become a sort of technocratic autocracy, which is what it's doing. So that's another job I've been up to this week. And then there's the writings. Okay, so that's just my spare time. I'm also working on several books at the moment. I just thought I'd run through and share with you what they are because they're quite interesting. And I was trying to think, which should I prioritise? So, make a list, give them weighted voting, what are the key things? I've reached a point where I realise they're all important, so I'm gonna work on them all simultaneously, an hour a day. The first thing I'm working on is volume 4 of my book on religious mathematics, which has got a Latin title, Philosophiae Religionis, Principia Mathematica, which is pinched from Newton's Philosophiae Naturalis, Principia Mathematica. So the mathematical principles of natural philosophy was his book. And I'm doing the mathematical principles of religious philosophy. Okay, so what's that? Well, it's everything to do with religious studies, comparative religion, theology, all of that. All of the periodic table, which is a sort of mathematical tool to analyse the demography of religions and the chronology of religions. Then marrying all that up with mathematical science, and I'm looking at things like statistics, probability theory, algebra, number theory, geometry. What are the patterns that we can detect in different religions? What structures have they got implicit in them? And even relativity theory comes in. There's a chapter on relativity theory because these religions are all actually moving around and they're all jostling and contesting space. So how can we understand any of them from where do we go to get an overview? It's like Einstein's thought experiment about what happens if we can move at the speed of light. Things look different. So anyway, that's a really interesting book, and I've done 3 volumes. Now I've got to finish volume 4, which is, I set out to do this a couple of years ago. I've got to finish volume 4, which is epic, but it's going to be an intellectually challenging job. So that's one thing. The other thing I'm working on is volume 8 of my autobiography, which I call Musings. I've done 7 volumes so far, and I kind of do it to keep track of my life as I'm going along. Another intellectual that did this is Rousseau. He wrote sort of his autobiography as he went along. And it's a really good way of keeping track of what you're up to. So I've got to do volume 8, which covers the years from 2018 to 2023. I've done up to 2017 in depth. And now I've got these years, these kind of lost years of Brexit and all the anxiety and chaos that was caused. And, you know, all the other problems that have been going on in the world. So it's important and it's overdue, so that's another job. These are both big projects. Then I'm working on my collected poems, volume 8. I've published 7 volumes of my poetry, and I'm going to end this talk with a quote from one of them. But I have another 100 poems which are written, but they have to be typed, they have to be proofread and you know, typeset into poetic format. And there's some interesting ones in that. And then I'm working on the 14th edition of my Love Journal, which I published for my Peace Studies Institute. It's the only academic journal in the world on the nature of love. Looks at all kinds of love: friendship, spiritual love, physical love, sexuality, emotional love, longing. You know, what is love? Even social and political love. What is, how can we love a cause, a movement, a community? Ecological aspects of love. Should we love animals? Should we love nature? Sunsets, and so on. And what is love? Christian theology says God is love, but that doesn't really help. They're both unknowns, to put it mathematically. It's like saying X is Y, but we don't know what X is and we don't know what Y is. So I'll be working on the next issue of the Love Journal in the coming months. I've also got my unfinished commentary on Das Kapital to finish off. Karl Marx's epic work, which I started, a few years back. It's a talking book, and I want to finish it. I've got about 2/3 of the way through. It's an epic work, and by the way, it's incredibly mathematical. Karl was a great mathematician and a polymath. He spoke many languages. He knew Latin and Greek. He peppers his text with all kinds of obscure historical references, and I'm referring to them all, and I'm chasing them up. He was secretly a Jacobite, actually. He was a great lover of Scotland. His wife was a descendant of Scots who'd gone to Prussia and married into Prussian families. And Jenny von Westphalen, his wife, was of part Scottish descent. He was very proud of that fact. So I'll be talking about that in relation to Scottish independence. And he was a great, protester against the British role in Ireland. He was very fully aware of the Irish cause, and so I'll be exploring a lot of the unknown Marx. That, as an intellectual historian, I'm neither writing it as a Marxist nor an anti-Marxist. I'm writing it as an intellectual historian who thinks that this is an interesting text which has had a huge influence in the last couple of centuries, and for good and ill. One of my concerns is that it lacks an ethics. Marx was not a professional philosopher, and he didn't realise the importance of ethics. He was more a sort of technocratic scientist of ideas who thought, oh, I've cracked the meaning of capital, it's all these equations, and now I can explain everything, and everything will be fine now, and we'll have a communist party and we'll just implement this. Yeah, okay, so what happens if the peasants don't like that and don't want their land taken away? Well, Stalin said, well, it doesn't matter, just kill them, massacre them. And that's the sort of where Marxism ended up because of its lack of ethics. And that's what I'll be pointing to I've already started. My commentary so far is on the Green University website. You can listen to it. If you think I'm wrong, feel free to tell me where. I think I'm right, which is not, it means there's a lot of work to do. we have to like reconstruct the good aspects of Marxism and jettison the worst bits, and we have to above all put an ethics back in. So those are just some of the things I'm working on, which are keeping me busy, and that's just an example of the work that a philosopher gets up to in his spare time. Okay, so yeah, and this coming week is there are also meetings and stuff, but I'm going to be working on the books mainly. So wish me well. Right. Any comments, questions, or observations before we move on to our periodic table? The wind is replying. I should mention one last thing I forgot to say. Some people know I also coordinate the Commonwealth Interfaith Network. Being a Canadian-British dual citizen, I love the Commonwealth. I've travelled to many of the different Commonwealth countries. And I was very honoured once to be invited to Westminster Abbey for a Commonwealth Day celebration in the presence of Her Majesty the Queen and faith leaders from every religion represented in the Commonwealth, like Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, different kinds of Christian, Protestant, Catholic, different kinds of Jewish, all the religions, Australian Aborigines and so on. And this was something the Queen was very strict on doing, celebrating the religious diversity of the Commonwealth. Although she was a Christian and the head of the Anglican Church, she wanted to say, no, we're one great family of faiths. So I went to that meeting, and then I thought, well, why don't we have a Commonwealth Faith Network, an interfaith network? I looked around, there wasn't one, and so I set it up in 1997. I met the then Secretary General of the Commonwealth, an African chief, Chief Anya Uku, a great man, and I corresponded with the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, and said, look, I'm doing this. I wrote to the Queen as a courtesy, and I got a kind of green light from everyone, like, do it, somebody's got to do it. And so we've had various meetings since then, and we're having one tomorrow, which is Commonwealth Day, 11th of March. It's going to be online. One of the beauties of Zoom is we can now meet from all different parts of the world, as if we were in the same room. So I'll be chairing that meeting tomorrow on Commonwealth Day. And if you're listening to this and you're a Commonwealth citizen, then please get in touch. I'll send you more details. And I believe in the project of the amity between nations, which the Commonwealth stands by, and the Commonwealth Charter, which declares that all Commonwealth citizens have fundamental rights and liberties, and one of them is freedom of religion. So let's enjoy it and use it whilst we've got that still. And one of my great sorrows is that the current Conservative government has not been living up to its duties as British government. Brexit was a completely irrational and anti-intellectual project from the beginning, led by plutocratic anti-internationalists and antithetical to everything that the Commonwealth stands for. And the million British citizens living in Europe were never consulted on this, just to take one example. So, and tragically, the Conservative government are closing the funding given to the British Interfaith Network, which is run by colleagues of mine, has been going for years, doing very, very decent and honourable work. So the British Interfaith Network is about to close down because the Tories don't approve ultimately of interfaith work. They have such a narrow-minded view of dogmatic Tory truthism that thinking broadly across religions seems to be beyond their mental capacities, which is ironic given that Rishi Sunak is a Hindu and ought to know better. So Rishi, if your advisors listen to this ever, keep the Interfaith Network going, please. Send them a check. And stop weaponising anti-Islamic discourse, which Rishi gave a speech in the last few days, using his prime ministerial gravitas to kind of say, oh, all Muslims are dangerous and evil, we have to be on our guard. They could be burrowing tunnels under London or whatever. This is fantasy land, and this is just craziness. Muslims are the best, most honourable, most decent people I've met in my many, many travels around the world. I've met many Muslims, many Hindus, many Christians, and they're all equally a mixture of good and evil. We all are. But to single out Muslims, and not mention other religious extremists, like what about the settlers who are harassing and, even killing innocent Palestinians in their own homeland at the moment, let alone bombing them. No mention of that, Rishi. Well, that's wrong. Britain is famous for our even-handedness, our sense of justice and fair play. I used to play cricket. You can't throw flamethrowers at the wicket. You have to throw the ball and play it properly. So anyway, yes, it's Commonwealth Day tomorrow. So celebrate the true Commonwealth, and the word means the wealth that we have in common, which is ultimately our spiritual wealth. And there's a great book called The Commonwealth of God by Lionel Curtis, which I have here. And he actually coined the word Commonwealth to describe this family of nations. Okay, so that's by way of introduction, really. Let's move on and look at the periodic table and do some mathematical analysis of it and ask whether we can learn anything from the juxtaposition of two antithetical traditions.
Is there in the periodic table something about the Muslim brothers? In France we say les frères musulmans.
That's a particular tradition, isn't it, within Islam?
Yes, and that's
founded in Egypt.
When I heard you speaking about the beauty of Islam, it's a kind of provocation from my side to ask you about this group
tradition,
and because it seems that it has been instrumentalized politically to disturb the harmony in many regions in the world. But I don't know if it appears it doesn't.
Well, not as such, but it probably would come under one of two places. We'll deal with it under number 80, which is the Sunni tradition, because the Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni brotherhood. So we'll call that number 80.
And also, it's so complex, I do not understand anything, so maybe you have a view on it.
I'll try to explain what I can, yeah. Okay, so that one, and then I'm going to juxtapose that with... Okay. About as opposite as you can get. The New Religious Movement 109, which is called Eclectic Goddess Worship, and which was, I suppose another way of calling that box would be the hippie movement. But it's kind of eclectic goddess worship seems to sum up the belief systems that I'll be talking about. But you can call it the hippie movement if you want, for shorthand. So they're in a sense antithetical, aren't they? Okay, let's look first at. I try and do this chronologically, so I'm going to actually start with eclectic goddess worship, which is 109, because I would argue this is the oldest of the two. And I would like to argue that, in fact, there's a reconciliation possible between them. Eclectic goddess worship can also be called the hippie tradition or neo-pagan movement. Who would we regard as the founders of this? Well, the hippies were very inspired by the Kabbalah, by Nietzsche, by Hermann Hesse. I remember reading Hermann Hesse as a young man, and his Journey to the East was our kind of Bible. Also, they discovered Theosophy and Blavatsky, Robert Graves and the White Goddess, the Rosicrucians, the Sufis, figures like Goethe, and there are Christian hippies as well. So there was a whole Christian movement. A chap called Stephen who set up a commune in America. Also, they were inspired by the American Indian culture and absorbed many of the teachings of the American Indian people, who are very strong with their goddess traditions. You know that Great Spirit has both a male and female aspect, and women are important in the council houses for their political role in the Iroquois clans and the other North American Indian traditions. The hippies were also inspired by Zen, which was very big, particularly in California. This idea there's such a thing as enlightenment became the thing to go for, and that was associated with Gary Snyder and Jack Kerouac. His famous book On the Road was the kind of Bible of this tradition, starting in the 50s onwards. That there was something we were all looking for, enlightenment, and peace was part of that. Another great thinker was Theodore Roszak, who wrote a book called Where the Wasteland Ends that inspired that generation. And he was a great intellectual historian, cultural critique of, the sort of wasteland that capitalism and communism have brought to the world with their stupid Cold War rivalry, desecrating the world, building nuclear weapons that nobody can use or needs, churning up vast amounts of money and just creating wastelands. There are whole parts of the States and of the former Soviet Union where people are being born with defective limbs because of nuclear testing, and the same in Australia. That's the wasteland, and the sludge and the chemical stuff that was pumped into the canals and waterways of the world. So Roszak was saying, look, how are we going to get out of this? Where does the wasteland end? It ends when we reclaim spirituality and we live these great metaphysical truths that all the faiths have talked about, and we live them individually and collectively in communities. So the model became a sort of small community, a commune. And I was influenced by this movement. I met people who were living that lifestyle when I was just starting out on my own spiritual journey, aged 18, 19, and I was just impressed by their integrity. Another figure that's important is Haridas Chowdhury, who was an American Hindu who'd been a disciple of Aurobindo and lived in California, and he set up the Center for Integral Studies in San Francisco. San Francisco was the sort of epicenter of this movement, and that centre is still going. They're looking at the integration of Western and Eastern thought. How can we reconcile Western philosophy with Eastern? And they've done some great work over the years. Chowdhury himself, inspired the setting up. Richard Tarnas is now professor there, and others. And also, I think they were all inspired by Jung. This hippie movement was very much Jungian inspired, and in fact, its antecedents go even further back to a community in the very north of Italy called Ascona, which was active from about 1900 to the First World War period. Exactly the same as the hippies. They were going back to nature, living in harmony with nature, studying spirituality in a lived way. They'd all read their Nietzsche and their Jung. Academic historians have written about Ascona, Monte Veritas it was called, the Mountain of Truth. And not far from there was a place called, where the Eranos meetings took place, which Jung used to go to, with a woman called Olga Freuber-Kapteyn. And that brought together some of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, looking into these esoteric matters.